Liftoff. And it has cleared the tower.
The President, like all Americans, watch this on television.
The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave.
Challenger, go with throttle up. Roger, go with throttle up. Obviously a major malfunction. We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded.
Joining us now in Los Angeles is Leo Krupp, a former shuttle test pilot for Rockwell International. Leo Krupp, good to have you with us this evening. What I would like for you to do, first of all, is let's take a look of the videotape from today. Talk us through it, where the places are, where there are questions, where the suspicions are. But before we do that, let's take a look at the scale model we have in the studio with us, Leo Krupp, and check me as we go along here. Just a reminder that the space orbiter, the spaceship itself, the Space Shuttle Challenger, is attached to this huge fuel tank which contains liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. Liquid hydrogen, highly explosive. Off on the sides are the solid rocket fuel boosters, 2 of them. And in space shuttles, the plan is for the whole apparatus, the engines at the tail of the space shuttle, plus the solid rocket boosters, all to go off the launch pad in one big thrust, and it has to be throttled back a bit, then throttled forward. And as it reaches just past the 2-minute mark, the plan is for the solid rocket boosters to jettison away and fall away. The space shuttle, with its engines down here, continues on up, using the fuel out of this tank, on upward toward space, and eventually the big fuel tank itself drops off, leaving the shuttle to orbit the Earth. Well, let's take a look now at the videotape and have you talk it through us, emphasizing as we go through this that there may be many theories and many hypotheses, but no one at this hour actually knows what happened. This was the scene at the launch site.
7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the
everything in the launch looked perfectly normal up to the point when dynamic pressure region where he throttles his engines back, the 3 main engines back to 65%, and then he throttles them back up to 104 after he's through this area. The aft end of the left booster, which is the one closest to you as you're viewing this.
Now, we're just about to see that, I think, Leo Krupp, in a few seconds.
Just watch toward the aft end of the solid rocket booster, and you'll see some little flame patterns come out, and those appear to be the ignition source. There you can see them, and there's no doubt the fuel for the explosion came from the external tank. But the question is what caused it, and NASA, I'm sure, will have an answer for this after they recover all the debris and look at all the data.
On tonight's broadcast, we're going to explore the 1986 Challenger shuttle disaster. Joining us via Skype interview will be Mr. Steve Cash, who is a stress analyst working on the solid rocket booster of the shuttle.
Hi, my name is Alice Morris. In 1983, NASA launched their second reusable space shuttle, the Challenger. The shuttle made 9 successful trips into space until a tragedy occurred on January 28, 1986, when it exploded over the Atlantic Ocean, killing all 7 crew members. An investigation was ordered, which found that the low temperatures led to the erosion of the O-rings, which were what sealed the joints of the solid rocket boosters.
Thank you, Allison. We will now move into the interview segment of our show. So, Mr. Cash, could you please describe some of the human errors that led up to the failure?
We had never done a full-scale test on a joint that was flogged yet either, and that was kind of one of those things that before Challenger no one would consider doing, and that's because they were afraid if you failed that joint, you might lose a major test facility. You would probably shut the program down for some extended period of time.
Were there any other human errors?
And so there was definitely a communication issue between engineering and the program. We didn't do a good job of giving management our rationale on why we were concerned about the joint.
We know the engineers were aware of the O-ring erosion issue, so why did the launch proceed?
But so we had a bad definition of what failure was. We kept thinking as long as we were completing our mission, that we were doing the right things, and really what we should have been was standing down.
Why did Morton Thiokol, the engineering firm responsible for designing the O-rings, recommend a launch?
Okay, because they didn't have the data to say that it was safe to fly, and they didn't have the data to say it was unsafe to fly. So it kind of put them in an untenable position because they couldn't tell them either way. And the best thing would have been to stand down until you understood what the data said, but they didn't. The Thiokol management decided that they would take the risk, and they recommended flying to NASA, which is what NASA wanted to do. So they accepted that recommendation, and we went to the next morning and went to fly.
before I show it to you, I want to impress upon you several things. And although this may sound like a crass statement, it's not meant to be so. The Challenger story and used as a case study to help students understand what's going to be coming up, especially. It's not about the death of 7 astronauts. And I know that sounds horrible, but it's not about that. That was a horrible, horrible culmination of the event itself. 7 exceptional people forfeited their lives for such an irresponsible launch system. It's also not about the loss of over $2 billion worth of hardware. What it's about is professionals in the system who have the authority and responsibility and fiduciary interest to do the right thing. And they abdicated that. They abdicated that because they were pressured to do so by the agency called NASA, as you will hear as the story unfolds.
The space shuttle program is in full swing. 1 year from now, NASA plans to launch Challenger. At the engineering plant of Morton Thiokol, a NASA contractor in Utah, Roger Beaujolais discovers the primary O-ring has failed on flight in STS-51B. Despite the O-ring damage, NASA continues its launches. As the summer progresses, Roger Beaujolais is still trying to have his concerns taken seriously on the rocket booster segments. The joints between each segment have to withstand the vast forces produced during blastoff. Each segment is sealed against the next segment with 2 rubber seals, called O-rings. For the rocket boosters to work, the joints have to function perfectly. Part of Roger Beaujolais' job is to make sure they do. 3 days after mission STS-51C lands, Beaujolais starts his inspection of the joints. Even 20 years later, the surprise at what he found that day is still vivid in his mind.
I went around, and on the first booster, I found on one of the joints hot gas, massive amount of hot gas from propulsion had actually compromised the primary O-ring. So I thought, my God, we came within about 8 or 10 seconds of failure.
The O-rings are designed to form a seal against the superheated rocket exhaust gases that are produced at incredible pressure during launch. The first O-ring should do the job. The second O-ring is a safety backup. Beaujolais' photos of Flight 51C's joints reveal hard evidence there is a major design flaw. He discovers that hot gas has blasted past the first ring and burned the second backup O-ring.
I instantly, in my mind, thought, this has to be caused by the cold weather that preceded this launch.
Beaujolais immediately hones in on the one thing that made Flight 51C different: the temperature. Post-flight analysis showed the O-rings were 53 degrees Fahrenheit, unusually cold for a launch. The O-rings are supposed to be flexible. On launch, they squeeze and stretch to seal the gap. But on Flight 51C, the dual O-ring system malfunctioned. The primary seal did not work, and hot gas escaped. Luckily, the second O-ring caught the leak. If it hadn't, the result might have been far more dangerous. NASA has a very ambitious launch schedule. Flight 51C is the first of 9 planned launches, and the pressure is on to keep the shuttle flying. Any delays would ultimately cost money, and jobs were at stake.
They didn't want to hear because I believe they wanted to ensure for the company they would get the follow-on contract that was in negotiations with NASA at that point in time. That contract was worth over $1 billion.
This letter is written to ensure that management is fully aware of the seriousness of the current O-ring erosion problem. It is my honest and very real fear that if we do not designate a team to solve the problem, with the field joint having the highest priority, that we stand in jeopardy of losing a flight.
Bob, did you read my memo? The O-rings, Bob? I really feel there's some urgency here. But the erosion was pretty bad until the last flight. I'll leave it with you.
While Beaujolais struggles to be heard, NASA has already announced the crew for the Challenger flight. Beaujolais' tactics are beginning to alienate the management of Morton Thiokol.
I have been described as a giant pain in the ass, okay? But the same people who described me that way were the same people who called me when they had a problem after they got to know who I was and what I could do and the experience I had.
Throughout the spring of 1985, Beaujolais struggles to get Morton Thiokol management to take his O-ring seal concerns seriously.
It was like I was talking to a solid piece of granite. No response, no reaction, no emotion, no anything. We all knew that the joint was defective, and we had no choice but to fly because that's what the managers insisted on. And so it was our job to keep it flying as safe as possible, but we didn't take that lightly.
Beaujolais is right. It will only be a matter of time before something.
That we had no power, no authority, no resources, and no management support. Well, how in the heck can you get anything done if you don't have any of those items that I just mentioned? You can't. And the frustration was just absolutely going up minute by minute, day by day.
The launch is rescheduled once again for Tuesday the 28th, even though the weather forecast predicts extremely cold temperatures down in the low 20s.
I first heard about the cold temperatures prior to the launch at 1 o'clock on the day before the launch. And from past experience, it just concerned me terribly.
And so we began to question the feasibility of launching at such a low temperature. And we spent the rest of the day raising these questions.
The night before the launch, there was a desperate struggle to stop Challenger from taking off. The temperature the next day is predicted to be more than 10 below freezing. A shuttle has never launched in temperatures so low before.
And that's when it really hit the fan big time. We rushed into a meeting, and 4 or 5 of us decided that we're going to make an attempt to stop the launch. The fact of the matter is, O-rings don't work with a damn at freezing temperatures. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. All you have to have is a modicum of common sense.
Beaujolais and Thompson alert the management at Morton Fire Hall of the dangers posed by launching at such a cold temperature. By early afternoon, their bosses are convinced. They get on the phone with NASA to voice their concerns. Morton Fire Hall recommends against launching, but NASA is reluctant to abort again unless there is hard evidence. They need proof and want to scrutinize Morton Fire Hall's O-ring data before calling it off. A conference call between Morton Fire Hall and NASA is planned for 8:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
We ran literally to our offices and basically rummaged through reports and file cabinets.
Just grab the current data and go.
We had 45 lousy minutes to prepare for the most important technical meeting of our careers.
How will the O-rings react to the cold temperatures predicted for launch the next morning?
At low temperatures, the O-rings are not so elastic. They won't seal properly. It'll be like putting a brick into a crack versus a sponge. And the grease, too, will be affected. It will be thicker and not as slick. We will have a higher O-ring actuation time, and if that happens, we will approach the threshold of secondary seal pressurization capability. So we have a situation where neither the primary seal nor the secondary seal will function.
After half an hour, the presentation is finished, and spirits among the engineers at Morton Fire Hall are high.
I'm a little confused by your presentation, Thiokol. You're telling me that we can't launch under 53 degrees, yet your own data suggests that you had blow-by on the O-rings when we launched at 75 degrees.
The blow-by was definitely worse at the lower temperature.
Then Malloy asked for Morton Fire Hall's launch recommendation. Their decision comes down to Joe Kilminster.
I have maximum of 10% confidence that he's going to stand by what we went into the meeting with, and that was everybody was totally supportive of not launching. And much to my surprise, Kilminster answers and says,
So I guess our conclusions are that we should not fly outside of our database, which is 53 degrees.
And metaphorically inside of my body, I went, yes! And I was absolutely on top of the world. That lasted for about 10 seconds.
The engineers at Morton Fire Hall are confident NASA will stop the Challenger launch. They now wait for the official response.
For God's sake, Morton Thiokol, when do you want me to launch? Next April? You guys are generating new launch criteria here.
All Morton Fire Hall can do is make a recommendation. Now Larry Malloy at Kennedy asked George Hardy at Marshall for his opinion.
When George speaks, everybody listens, because George is one of the most highly recognized engineer managers on the program.
Thiokol, I am appalled, but I won't go against the contractor. In that case, I can't recommend launch.
It's the second no vote, because he would not overrule the contractor. But it's also something else. And he said he was appalled. That was a killer. Absolute killer.
With their next multi-million-dollar contract still under negotiation with NASA, the Morton Fire Hall managers are under intense pressure. At this point, Senior Vice President Gerald Mason intervenes.
Joe, ask everyone to take a 5-minute caucus offline. We have to make a management decision. Let's look over the data again and consider Larry Malloy's points.
If we launch at the predicted temperatures, we are out of our experience base. Even if we take 40 degrees as the temperature floor, we are still way out of our database. In launching at these low temperatures, we are moving away from goodness.
To the engineers' dismay, the managers ignore them and hold a private conversation. It's clear the managers are changing their minds.
I am so angry and so mad and so frustrated that I slam the photographs down and I'm screaming at them because I saw what they did to Arnie. To look at them, avoid what they're telling us. It's very... The lower the temperature, the more hot gas gets past the joint, as you see in this photograph of the January 1985 flight. I angrily picked up the photographs and returned to my position at the table, and I basically put my head down on my arms, and I was so close to losing it.
Let's take a vote. Do we recommend a launch?
Every stinking piece of data we had, 14 charts, one of which was the title page, pointed to a reason not to launch. You can't launch with this data. It's impossible. The Vice President of Engineering is on the fence, and now he's being pressured to change his mind.
Well, Bob. You have to take off your engineering hat and put on your management hat.
Our position is that although temperature effects are a concern, the data predicting blow-by are inconclusive. Are there any disagreements or any other comments concerning the Thiokol recommendation?
At NASA, the silence means go for launch.
When I opened the door from the garage to my house in Willard, the first thing that my wife said to me is, "What's wrong?" I said, "Oh, nothing, honey." I said, "I had a great day." But I says, it ended up in a meeting. I says, "We're going to launch tomorrow and kill the astronauts." But outside of that, it was a great day.
The temperature plummets. The astronauts pass the time thinking that tomorrow will be another scrub. Out on the launch pad, icicles as long as 18 inches are forming on the shuttle. Despite the low temperatures, Challenger will launch the next morning.
Krista McAuliffe has been handed an apple by the closeout crew.
Good morning, Krista. Hope we go today. Good morning.
The temperature hits 36 degrees, 30 degrees colder than any previous shuttle launch.
2, 1, and liftoff.
Why did Morton Thiokol, the engineering firm responsible for designing the O-rings, recommend a launch?
Okay, because they didn't have the data to say that it was safe to fly, and they didn't have the data to say it was unsafe to fly. So it kind of put them in an untenable position because they couldn't tell them either way.